There was a time when Harlem was more than just a neighborhood. It was an empire. An empire built on loyalty, rhythm, and the dream of brotherhood. At the heart of that empire stood Cameron and Jim Jones, two names that defined an era. Two brothers who turned street dreams into hip-hop royalty. Together, they created Dipset, a movement bigger than music, bigger than fame. But what happens when loyalty turns into ego? When friendship becomes competition? When brothers stop seeing each other as family and start seeing each other as rivals? Tonight, we pulled back the curtain on one of hip-hop's most tragic stories, the war that destroyed Dipset. From chart-topping hits to backstage betrayal, from Harlem pride to public humiliation, this is the untold truth behind Cameron and Jim Jones' explosive fallout. Because sometimes success doesn't break you. It reveals who was never really on your side. This is more than rap beef. This is brotherhood gone bad. And once you see the truth, you'll never look at Dipset the same way again. Harlem, the heart of hustle, fashion, and ambition. In the early 2000s, it wasn't just a place, it was an attitude. And at the center of that attitude stood two men who would change the sound of New York forever, Cameron and Jim Jones. Before the lights, before the fame, before the betrayal, there was loyalty. Cameron was already the king of Harlem's mixtape scene, sharp with his words, cool with his moves, and fearless with his vision. Jim Jones, on the other hand, wasn't just a friend, he was Cam's shadow in the grind. Where Cam went, Jim followed. Where Cam talked, Jim acted. They were brothers, not by blood, but by something deeper, survival, together. They built the Diplomats, or as the streets would soon chant, Dipset. It wasn't just a rap group. It was a movement, the Harlem Renaissance in hip-hop form. Pink furs, flashy cars, custom chains, Dipset turned street dreams into fashion trends. They gave Harlem a new identity, loud, proud, and unapologetic. Cameron became the face, the strategist, the visionary. Jim Jones became the energy, the street general, the enforcer, the one who kept the fire burning. And when they added Joel Santana and Freaky Zeke into the mix, Dipset became unstoppable. From Oh Boy to Hey Ma. From their mixtapes to their swagger, Dipset didn't just make hits, they made history. Harlem had found its champions, and the world was watching. Bet MTV. Source magazine, everyone wanted a piece of the movement. But beneath all the flashing lights and success, something quiet was brewing. You couldn't see it on stage, but behind the cameras, cracks had already started to form. You see, in every empire, there's always one person who wants more. And in Dipset, that person was Jim Jones. Jim was loyal, no doubt about it. But loyalty can be heavy when you start to feel overlooked. Cameron was the leader, the decision maker, the one signing deals and making moves. But Jim, he wanted his own spotlight. He'd been standing next to greatness for years. Now he wanted to be seen as greatness. And that, Johnny, is where the story starts to twist. There were rumors around the crew, quiet whispers that Jim was tired of being second. Some said he felt like Cam didn't give him enough credit for Dipset's rise. Others claimed industry execs were in Jim's ear, telling him he could go solo. That he was the real Harlem voice. At first, it was just tension, the kind that brothers have when the business gets serious. But as Dipset's money grew, so did the distance between Cam and Jim. Business meetings became arguments. Studio sessions turned cold, and the love that once built Dipset slowly began to fade. Still, to the fans, everything looked perfect. They saw the jewelry, the tours, the interviews, not the silence between verses, not the resentment behind the smiles. Jim started to test his wings. He wanted his own deals, his own features, his own control. Cam noticed, and he didn't like it. To Cam, Dipset was his vision. To Jim, Dipset was their creation. That difference in mindset was small, but deadly behind the scenes. Jim started talking to people without Cam's knowledge. Radio hosts, producers, promoters. Cameron, always the strategist, took it as betrayal. He started pulling back, less communication, less approval, less brotherhood. By 2005, Dipset was still on top, but inside, it was falling apart. You could feel the change in interviews. Cam would dodge questions about Jim. Jim would get defensive when Cam's name came up. Then came the moment that changed everything. A comment that would echo through Harlem for years. During an interview, Cameron casually referred to Jim Jones as an employee. Sounded small, but for Jim, it was the ultimate insult. After years of loyalty, street hustle, and blood sweat for the team, being called an employee was like being stabbed in the back. That single word started the war that would destroy Dipset. Jim's pride was shattered. He stopped defending Cam. He stopped pretending everything was good. And when people asked him about Dipset, his voice carried pain. Pain that fans could hear but didn't understand. That's when the brotherhood turned into a battlefield. Cameron had his camp. Jim had his. And Harlem, once united under the Dipset flag, was now divided. But this was just the beginning. Because once pride enters the room, it never leaves quietly. The Dipset dynasty was about to face its darkest chapter, and the streets of Harlem would never be the same again. The word employee, that's all it took to ignite the war. One word, one moment. One line that burned down years of brotherhood. When Cameron called Jim Jones an employee during that interview, Harlem froze. Fans couldn't believe it. After everything they had built together, the tours, the loyalty, the dream, Cam had reduced Jim to just a worker. Not a partner, not a brother, just an employee. For Jim, it wasn't just disrespect, it was betrayal. He had gone to war for Dipset. He had defended Cam when everyone else turned their back. He had fought, bled, and cried for that movement. And now the man he called brother was talking like he made him. That's when Jim changed. The loyalty that once drove him turned into anger. The silence between them became a storm. And that storm was about to hit the industry. Cam kept moving like nothing happened. He dropped new music, posed in interviews, and acted like Dipset was still his empire. But behind the scenes, Jim was building something of his own, a movement that would make the world see he didn't need. Cameron to Shine. He linked up with Bird Gang, started putting his people on, and began carving his own lane. And then the moment came that changed everything. We Fly High. When that track dropped, the streets went crazy. Ballin' became a national anthem from New York to LA for the first time. Jim wasn't standing in anyone's shadow. He was the star, and guess what? Cam didn't like that. Behind closed doors, the tension was thick. Cam thought Jim was stealing the Dipset image, using the same swagger, the same Harlem energy, without giving credit. Jim thought Cam was jealous, unable to handle the fact that his protege had finally become his equal. The interviews turned darker. Cam started throwing subliminal lines about loyalty, about betrayal, about people forgetting who made them. Jim responded with emotion, tears, frustration, and honesty. That legendary Hot 97 interview broke the internet. Jim Jones crying on air saying how much he loved Cam, how he would have died for him, how he couldn't believe what happened. You could hear the heartbreak in his voice. It wasn't about fame anymore. It was about love. He said, "I loved that man more than I loved myself. We built something real, and he turned his back on me." That clip went viral before viral was even a word. Fans were shocked. How could two Harlem legends, two brothers, end up like this? Cam laughed it off in public, but behind the scenes, it hit him too. He had never seen Jim like that, vulnerable, emotional, raw. But by then, it was too late. Lines were drawn. Sides were chosen. And Harlem had become a battlefield. Half the street stood with Cam, the strategist, the boss, the mastermind. The other half rode with Jim, the loyal soldier turned rebel. Dipset was no longer a family. It was two kingdoms at war. Cam kept his distance. He mocked Jim's emotional outburst, calling him soft. Jim fired back, saying Cam had forgotten where he came from. Then came the rumors. Industry insiders whispered that Cam was blackballing Jim behind the scenes, blocking opportunities, keeping his name out of major deals. Cam denied it, saying Jim was just being paranoid. But the streets believed Jim because Harlem respects loyalty more than anything. And Jim had always been loyal. And Jim had always been loyal. Around this time, other names got pulled into the chaos: Joel Santana, Freaky Zeke, and even outside rappers. Some tried to stay neutral, others picked sides. But one thing was clear: the Dipset was broken. By 2007, the unity was gone. Cameron went solo again, focusing on his own projects. Jim doubled down on Bird Gang and started appearing with people Cam would never have approved of. Old photos of them together now looked like memories from another lifetime. The fans were heartbroken. They had grown up watching these two men build Harlem's legacy, only to see it fall apart on live radio. But behind all the anger, there was still love. They wouldn't admit it, but both Cam and Jim missed each other. They just didn't know how to say it. And neither one was willing to make the first move. Every time one of them dropped a track, the other's name was somewhere in the lyrics. Not directly, but you could feel the shots. It wasn't just a rap beef, it was a slow, painful breakup. Two brothers, too proud to apologize, too hurt to let go. Cam's camp said Jim changed because of fame. Jim's camp said Cam never respected his loyalty. Both were right. Both were wrong. Because the truth is, success tests every friendship. And this one failed the test. By the time Dipset officially split, fans had already chosen their sides. The media called it one of the biggest breakups in hip-hop history. And while everyone else talked about money, labels, and contracts, the real story was deeper. This wasn't about business. It was about brotherhood. About two men who loved each other like family. Until fame turned that love into fire by the end of the decade. Cameron and Jim Jones were no longer friends, no longer partners, no longer Dipset. The empire they built together had collapsed, and Harlem, once united under their movement, was now divided. The story of Dipset had turned from inspiration to heartbreak. But every story has another side. And sometimes, even in the ashes of betrayal, the spark of brotherhood never truly dies. Because as much as they hated each other, deep down, they still missed being brothers. Time, that's what it took to cool the fire. Years of silence, missed calls, and ignored messages until the noise faded and only the memories remained. Cam, Ron, and Jim Jones had gone their separate ways. Different paths, different crews, different lives. Cam was focusing on business, films, and a quieter life away from the chaos. Jim was still in the streets, still hustling, still proving himself, but something inside him was missing. The world had moved on. New artists came and went. New trends replaced old ones. But for the real ones, the streets of Harlem never forgot Dipset. Every block, every barbershop, every old mixtape shop still had their posters, their songs, their energy. The sound of Hey Ma, Oh Boy, and We Fly High still echoed like memories frozen in time. But deep down, both men knew Dipset wasn't supposed to end like this. Cameron had moments where he'd scroll through old footage, performances, studio clips, interviews, and pause when Jim laughed beside him. That brotherhood was real, the kind you don't find twice. Jim, on the other hand, had matured. The wild energy that once fueled his anger had turned into reflection. He realized he didn't want to fight anymore. He just wanted peace and respect. For years, the media tried to push them back into a feud: blog headlines, clickbait stories, rumors about diss tracks. But the truth was, both Cam and Jim were tired. They'd lost friends. They'd lost years. They didn't want to lose more. Then came 2010, a moment that shocked the industry. After years of silence, Cameron and Jim Jones were seen together again. Not at a concert, not at a press event, but in Harlem, the same streets that raised them. Someone snapped a photo. Cam with that classic smirk. Jim with a calm grin. No captions. No explanations. Just two men standing side by side. The internet exploded. Dipset reunion. Cam and Jim back. Is the war over? Nobody had answers, but one thing was clear: something had shifted. Behind the scenes, quiet conversations had started. Old friends like Joels and Zeke had played peacemakers, telling both men it was time. Time to let go. Time to rebuild. Time to remember who they were. And that's when it happened. The Dipset reunion, the crowd roared like Harlem itself came alive again. Cam walked out first, smooth, confident, wearing the same pink aura that made him a legend. Then Jim appeared. The moment they locked eyes, the place erupted. Years of pain, misunderstanding, and pride disappeared in that one look. They didn't have to say a word. The crowd said it for them. Dipset, Dipset, Dipset. For the first time in over a decade, Cameron and Jim Jones shared the same stage, the same mic, the same heartbeat. And when they performed, I really mean it. You could feel the emotion in every word. I'm built for this. This is what I do. The lyrics hit different. They weren't just rapping anymore. They were remembering. After the show, Cam and Jim shared a quiet moment backstage. No cameras, no reporters, just them. They didn't talk about the past. They didn't need to. Cam looked at him and said, "We really did something special, huh?" Jim nodded, smiled, and replied, "Yeah, bro, we did. It wasn't an apology, but it was peace. And in hip-hop, sometimes peace speaks louder than forgiveness." Over the next few years, they've worked together again. Music, tours, interviews. It wasn't perfect. The trust wasn't the same. But the love was still there. A brotherhood built on pain, success, and Harlem pride. They laughed about the old days, about the crazy stories, about everything that once tore them apart. And in those moments, you realized this wasn't just a rap group. This was family. The industry tried to pit them against each other for views and headlines. But in the end, they rose above it. They proved that legacy matters more than ego. That even when pride destroys what love builds, time can rebuild it again today. When you see Cameron and Jim Jones, you see history. You see Harlem royalty. You see two men who went through everything: money, betrayal, fame, think forgiveness, and still found a way to respect each other. They may not hang out every day. They may not be inseparable like before, but there's mutual love, and that's real. And when the streets talk about Dipset now, they don't talk about beef. They talk about the movement, the style, the pink fur coats, the swag, the way Harlem stood tall because of them. Cam's single quotes, "Ron and Jim Jones didn't just make hits, they made an era." An era that still defines hip-hop culture to this day. From Oh Boy to We Fly High, from laughter to tears, from brothers to enemies and back again, their story is a mirror of life itself. Because sometimes family fights. Sometimes love turns to anger. But true bonds, they never die. As Jim once said in an interview years later, "No matter what, that's my brother. We might not always agree, but we're forever connected." And Cam replied with his usual calm smile, "We had our differences, but Dipset was forever." That's Harlem. It wasn't ego. It wasn't money. It was love. Love that burned too bright, too fast, and couldn't survive the fame. But even after the flames, the ashes still glow, because real brotherhood never fades. And there you have it, the story of two Harlem legends who built an empire from nothing, tore it apart with pride, and still managed to rise again from the ashes. Cameron and Jim Jones showed the world what it means to be brothers. Not by blood, but by bond. They fought. They laughed. They fell apart. But in the end, they proved that respect is louder than revenge, and loyalty lasts longer than fame. So the next time you hear Dipset echo through a crowd, remember, it's more than music. It's Harlem's heartbeat. It's legacy. It's the reminder that even when life pulls you apart, love always finds its way back. Now, I want to hear from you. Do you think Cam and Jim truly forgave each other? Or are they just keeping peace for the cameras? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Because this story deserves your voice too. And if you felt that Dipset energy tonight, that real Harlem spirit, smash that like button, comment Dipset forever, and hit subscribe so you never miss another deep dive into hip-hop's untold truths. Because this isn't just entertainment. This is culture. And the story ain't over yet.